What are the first three words that come to mind when you hear the term classroom management? Control, discipline, and order are probably the most common responses I hear to this question. I would like you to keep this question in mind as we proceed through today's lecture. Although classroom management continues to be cited as one of the top concerns for beginning teachers as well as many experienced teachers, the majority of educators have never had the opportunity to take a course with an explicit focus on classroom management. Due to this lack of training, teachers develop many misconceptions about classroom management and have a very narrow view of what constitutes effective classroom management. For example, they tend to think of classroom management along the lines of discipline, hence the word cited in the opening question. These misconceptions and narrow view of classroom management lead us to our goals. Our specific goals for this lecture are to identify and dispel misconceptions about classroom management, to introduce a practical model for thinking about classroom management, to broaden your conception of classroom management, and to provide a framework for developing your own classroom management plan. Let's get started with goal number 1, identifying and dispelling some common misconceptions about classroom management. Misconception number 1. Classroom management is synonymous with discipline. Classroom management is much broader, and there are many more tasks involved in effective classroom management than just addressing discipline. We will be going over these tasks in a few minutes. Misconception number 2. Effective classroom management results in a quiet classroom. Well, the ultimate goal of effective classroom management is to develop an environment conducive to learning. However, learning requires talking, sharing, experimenting, etc., all of which create noise. Therefore, an effectively managed classroom will not and should not always be a quiet classroom. Misconception number 3. An effective management plan relies on extrinsic rewards. Unfortunately, more and more classrooms are relying on various extrinsic reward-based systems to manage their classrooms. Sometimes these systems are forms of bribery and not the most effective way to manage a classroom. Although there can be a time and place for these types of systems, they cannot and should not be your entire management plan. Misconception number 4. Engaging instruction is the management. Well, let's think about it. The more engaged a student is in a lesson, yes, the less likely he or she is to choose to misbehave. However, although engaging instruction is a very important part of effective classroom management, it does not negate the need to address the other areas of classroom management that we will discuss in a minute. Unfortunately, these misconceptions get in the way of developing a plan to effectively manage one's classroom. Therefore, the first step of an effective classroom management plan is to eliminate any and all of these misconceptions. Now let's move on to goal number 2 of our discussion, introducing a practical model of classroom management. The first thing that is important to mention about the model is the title, the process of classroom management. The idea that classroom management is a process is a very important concept. Classroom management is not something you just do and check off your list as complete and never need to think about it again. Rather, it is an ongoing process that is part of your teaching and planning every single day of the school year. Now you can see in front of you a model with 5 different areas. I'm going to fill in a different task in each one of those areas, and ultimately, those 5 tasks, when they are brought together, form the process of classroom management. The first key task that is part of classroom management is creating the physical environment. The more thoughtful and purposeful the physical layout of a teacher's classroom, the more it will facilitate your ability to teach and encourage students to behave. The next task is the idea of developing effective rules and routines. Rules and routines are a teacher's most powerful tool to communicate his or her behavioral expectations. Next is the idea of developing caring relationships with and among your students. Think about it. The better students get along with one another, the less problems that will occur. Likewise, the more students like and respect you, the more likely it is that students will choose to behave and engage in academic activities. The next task is the implementation of engaging instruction. Again, the more motivated and engaged students are in a lesson, the less likely they will be to choose to misbehave. So as I mentioned while discussing the misconceptions, engaging instruction is an important part of effective classroom management, but it doesn't negate the need for the other tasks we have discussed. The last task is addressing discipline problems. Again, I said earlier, discipline is an important part of classroom management, but as you can see now, it isn't the only part. So there you have our model of the process of classroom management. So why do I like this model? Well, for several reasons. First, I like it because it conceptualizes classroom management as much more than just discipline. It identifies 5 tasks that are part of the process of classroom management. The next reason I like this model is this idea of prevention and response. Classroom management is very much about the idea of prevention. In other words, what can teachers do to prevent misbehavior from happening in the first place and ultimately develop that environment conducive to learning? However, no matter how effective teachers are at preventing misbehavior, there will be times when misbehavior occurs and teachers need to respond. However, think of these green and red areas as a sliding scale. The better teachers become at the first 4 tasks in this process, the smaller the response area should become, and we are operating much more in a preventative mode. If you are not very skilled or unaware of these first 4 tasks, the scale can move the other way, and the first 4 tasks can be squeezed into a very little green area, and the teacher will operate primarily in a response or reactive mode. So you can see that understanding this idea that prevention is important with respect to effective classroom management is very important. Another idea about this model that is important to discuss is the idea that the model is broken down into 5 key tasks. The model implies that each area is equally important. However, that is not the case. Although each task must be addressed when developing a management plan, the tasks that are emphasized more or less will vary with many factors, such as the teacher's personality and beliefs, the specific teaching context, like grade level and/or subject, cultural beliefs, etc. It is also interesting to note that there is research to support effective practices in each area mentioned in the model. Also, when I am given a classroom management problem, I can usually link it back to one of the areas on this model. Well, this brings us to the end of the first lecture. So let's recap our goals. We wanted to identify and dispel misconceptions about classroom management, to introduce a practical model for thinking about classroom management, to broaden your conception of classroom management, and to provide a framework for developing your own classroom management plan. I feel like we have accomplished these goals, and hopefully you do as well. Next, I would highly recommend continuing through the rest of this course where you can learn more specifically about the role that each task in the model plays in the overall process of classroom management. Some specific strategies will also be presented, and video clips of teachers talking about that area of classroom management are also included. Please note, although it isn't required to go through the course in any particular order, it is highly recommended to go through the different lectures in the same order that the tasks are presented in the model of classroom management. Good luck.